Semrush's report revealed that 67% of businesses already use AI for content marketing and SEO, and that was just the beginning. This underscores AI's real potential to streamline workflows and support scalable SEO operations. Yet, few SEO practitioners understand how to integrate this capability into their business and use it as a tool to amplify their impact and business's bottom line. This is the Voice of Search podcast. My name is Tyson, co-founder and COO of Pretty Visible, and today I'm joined by Eric Enge, president at Pilot Holding. Eric is an SEO OG who found and sold over 4 SEO businesses, literally wrote the book on the art of SEO, and recently published the new book of using generative AI for SEO and AI-first strategies to improve quality, efficiency, and costs. Today, Eric's going to be walking us through actionable strategies for building an effective SEO program with Gen AI. Eric, welcome back to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Tyson. I'm looking forward to it. It's a great topic, and it's always great to chat with you.
I was happy to catch up. I was fortunate enough to cross paths with you, working with different clients, and I've always admired kind of the contributions that you made to the industry. I remember getting into the industry, reading some of your early works. So I'm happy to have you on the podcast and also give some advice to the community here on how we should be really adopting Gen AI, not just as far as where we compete in SEO, but actually like how we're building programs and teams and managing the channel.
And there are a lot of great ways to do that, as long as you can restrain yourself from going overboard. And we're going to talk about all that.
Well, and I feel like we have to start to, you've been in the industry for so long, you've had these different kind of successes, but yet the industry seems to keep pulling you back. So what is it about SEO right now that is so exciting, and like what keeps you energized to keep this involvement?
So fundamentally, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. And honestly, that was sort of bred into me as I was growing up, as I watched my father interacting with a lot of different entrepreneurs and saw some very successful people. And that's entrepreneurs, when they see disruptive events and times of change, rather than being scared of it, they embrace it, because that's when new winners are born. And so that energy just comes naturally to me when there's big change on the horizon. And I think we all agree that with what's going on with AI and Gen AI right now, that there is big change on the horizon. So it's a cool time.
Well, let's talk a little bit, maybe before like the application of how we're using this, like from your perspective right now, like where are you viewing, the level of sophistication in some of the recent tools? Like not too long ago, we had the release of ChatGPT 5. So maybe we kind of start with like, what are we working with today in this technology, and how are you kind of viewing that?
So yeah, there's two big things that are happening right now. ChatGPT 5, as you mentioned, and also agentic browsers is sort of the next thing coming. And they both have some really interesting implications. So with ChatGPT 5, the reason why this is important is one of the big critiques of where OpenAI was a year ago was that their chances of making the infrastructure required to deliver answers to people via ChatGPT was not fiscally viable. It was too expensive. There was too much processing power. And it's because they had this model of absorbing all the world's information and then, finding a way to be able to spit that back selectively out to people, to grossly simplify it. ChatGPT 5 is different. ChatGPT 5 is smart at knowing how to go find information quickly as targeted to specific topics. So the computational overhead of building the model and running the model should bring them a lot closer to, not running so deeply in the red. I'm not. I don't have enough information now to tell you if it's going to make them profitable per se, but it should bring them a. It's headed very much in the right direction. I think is actually the way I want to say it. Um, with agentic browsers, that's also really interesting because the goal there is for both Perplexity and OpenAI that have them is to provide users with a surface which becomes their primary interface to the whole web. And you could say, okay, well, Chrome is that for me now, but the difference is that an agentic browser will do things like take high-level tasks for you, go research information across a whole bunch of websites, bring some things back to you, ask for some clarifications about what you want or how to handle some aspects of the information it gets, and will actually be your coach through the execution of the task. Unlike Chrome, which is a tool you can use to execute the task, but you have to manage all the steps of the process. With an agentic browser, it's largely done for you. So they're both pretty significant changes.
Which is like, I feel like there's an intersection, and I've always been kind of describing to people as like, there's three main areas that I'm looking at for like how these shifts are changing our actions or our like approach. And
Mm-hmm.
you have the landscape shift of like the space that we're competing in, whether it's AI mode, ChatGPT, Perplexity, whatever. And then there's how we're also using this from like an execution of work perspective.
Correct.
And then there's kind of like always the stakeholder management, how we're leading the narrative in the organization or responding to executives moving quicker on this or
Right.
having someone in their ear to move quicker. And so I think like those are the three areas, but I like that you're kind of calling out the kind of approach to that agentic area where it's almost like a little bit of an intersection of it, because
Right.
some of the how we use it is that like companion coach, and that's been something Jordan and I have been discussing a lot, is like how that then impacts the composition of SEO teams and structures, or how you're looking at that kind of like management in the channel. um so maybe kind of like going into that areas of how we manage the channel, how are you seeing kind of some of these recent developments impact that?
So, wow, that's a multi-layered question. So I'm going to start with the first part, which is the scope of impact. So,
Mm,
um, I mean, let's face it, Google is still the big dog, and so OpenAI and ChatGPT are certainly getting an enormous amount of press and getting mind share. And I think it's fair to say that the impact on the younger generations is stronger than it is on the people who have deeply ingrained habits of using Google for decades, as Google and Chrome together, as the surface they use to approach the web. And so those habits are going to die hard. And I think the thing that we can't overlook, in spite of the jumps that OpenAI and ChatGPT got on things, is that Google caught up with that quicker than people thought they would. And so, and you see this, by the way, reflected in their stock price, because the analysts are still seeing Google growing, and they're not forecasting any doom and gloom around Google. So Google's still the big dog. And so there's a lot that needs to happen to change that. And the way we need to think about this is, for a change to be truly disruptive, it needs to be a big enough change that it's worth people changing deeply ingrained habits. And so that's not trivial. And there are all kinds of things that have happened through history, where people launched something that everybody thought was going to be the next big thing. And it just wasn't a big enough thing for people to adopt it. This one's a little different. Um, ChatGPT, launched November 2022, as we all know, and then Google responding. So this is a situation where Google has embraced the change, and AI overviews, which are a lighter weight version of Gemini, which you can read as cost less to run and provide answers. So they are public after all. They have that burden of delivering profits, but nonetheless, uh, um, that will give that experience to a lot of people. And sorry, I know this is a long answer, but there was a lot in it. Uh,
Yeah.
and the other thing I expect is I'd be shocked if sometime in the next 6 to 9 months, Google doesn't take some portion of their queries, call it 20%, 25%, 30%, and fling them into full AI mode. Um, and I think if it were me, I would seriously be thinking about doing that, right? Because
Mm.
Gemini is pretty good, and so yeah. Um, so when we talk about the shifts in the market, and this is where you started with this question, and I don't want to lose that part of the question. Um, yeah, it's certainly it's happening to a degree. But even when you think about what might happen with agentic browsers, a wild success would be that they have 15% market share in 3 years. It's not going to be 70% next year.
Mm.
So it's going to happen incrementally. And ChatGPT, which is nowhere near 15% of search, um, uh, it's going to take time for them to build their share. So while we think about what we do in our day-to-day work, and this is my philosophy, I'm sure other people would espouse different things, because there are people out there who like to emphasize how big the world changes are. But that's not me. I try to be very pragmatic about things. The primary thing you still have to focus on for getting traffic and visibility is Google and AI overviews and traditional search, and that's the primary platform still. And it's important to remember that. Um, there are some other changes which I think we're going to end up talking about, which is how much more we know about how all these algorithms work, and that's a whole nother conversation, which is good for optimizing across all the platforms.
Which, and I definitely want to get into that aspect of it. From the previous piece, though, to me, it sounds like there's kind of like two pieces kind of at play where you have, on one hand, the strength and or advantage that Google has with dominance in the market, size. With that also comes volume of data that they're working with.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also have a challenge in the sense of you do have a publicly traded company aspect. You made kind of the comments of, hey, that's going to influence how they might approach some of these releases and next steps.
Right.
So, I mean, if I'm kind of reading between the lines there, it feels like Google still has the advantage and they would be like the favorite if you're boiling this down into a thing. But there is enough of a threat and a like I at least from my experience, this feels like the most significant actual like threat that they've had in a sense of how they're reacting and responding to it. And I do think it's smart that they're leaning into this change rather than just trying to continue to it. And so it's not like it feels like they're being naive to some of the shifts in the market, but at the same time, there is,
Right.
some public traded company elements about it.
Yeah, no, they definitely felt the pressure. And as I understand the early part of the story, is that ChatGPT came out, and then oh gosh, I can't remember what was the original thing they released called. Um, they're oh, it's escaping my mind right now. Somebody will. Uh, we'll think of it here shortly. But they, weren't yet prepared to go and try to disrupt the search experience. And as I understand it, Samsung forced their hand because Samsung was prepared to dump Google to go with Bing in order to get access to what's now called Copilot, and because they wanted to have the generative AI experience on their phones, and suddenly the willingness to change became so. And look, it's entirely possible that how I ended up hearing that story may have been overstated, but actually, market pressure is absolutely in play here, and Samsung may well have played a part, and maybe even a big part. But so it's important enough, right? I talked about how disruptive a disruptive change needed to be. It isn't so disruptive that everybody changed overnight, right? And it's like, well, changed overnight is relative, but you look back when there were railroad companies and all the transportation was done by railroad when you were going, more than you could get to on your horse, and then the so-called horseless carriages came out, and the railroad companies didn't adapt, right? But cars were personal, right? That was a huge change. You had your own thing sitting right outside your door. You could walk out, hop in it, and go. That was a massive disruptive change, and it was so disruptive that the victory of that was inevitable over a very short period of time. I think that ultimately the generative AI stuff will rise to that level of disruption when we're said and done. It's
Mm.
just going to take a while yet, and there's many reasons for that. They still make mistakes. People talk about it less, but I got a couple images created the other day, and then it was like tearing my hair over trying to get it to fix the typos without adding new ones. And it's like um, it's it's still a little bit stupid in its own way, because it's basically providing the next best word based on the sources it uses, and that's not knowledge. That's homogenization.
True, which is always a nice reminder. But I mean, maybe to that point, like let's dive in a little bit to, what are some of those factors? It's a lot of questions and I feel like conversations that I'm hearing of like, are we completely changing our strategy, our prioritization based on how these systems are working? Or is it more a reordering of it? Like there's clearly a lot of overlap kind of between the two. So I've always been advocating to people it's not an all or none kind of like we're only
Correct.
going to do this, we're only going to do that. But maybe like how are you viewing kind of the factors that can lead to success in these systems over maybe like traditional approaches?
Well, so I'm going to say something that I know a lot of people out there hate, who I want to emphasize how different everything is. But there is actually a lot of commonality in the algorithms used, like a ton of commonality in the algorithms used to determine relevance of a piece of content. And relevance is a fundamental ranking factor no matter what platform you're using. So that's a big part of the challenge. And even the way that authority is determined between LLMs and traditional Google search isn't like remarkably different. It kind of comes down to there's a set of algorithms called embeddings, which allow us to create vectors, and usually very large dimensional vectors. I think we believe that Google uses their text embedding 5 model, which is 768 dimensional vector, um, to determine relevance of a piece of content, which could be a word, a phrase, a passage, which is, you could roughly think of that as being a paragraph, a whole page, or a whole website. And all of those can be reduced to the same 768 dimensional vector, and then they can be compared to each other. And you can then take a search phrase or a prompt, and you can find content that is relevant to that, based on using this, this vector math. And for those who want more of the gory details, and you can research this, it uses an algorithm called cosine similarity to measure how similar one vector is to another. And so conceptually, just to make it simple for people who aren't familiar with how this works, just to focus on two words for a moment, the words hat and cap sound like they're extremely similar to each other, especially if you're talking about, this kind of cap right here, right? So, with that in mind, the vectors for those, if we just reduce it to two-dimensional space for a bit, will be extremely close to each other. So what that means is the cosine similarity score will be very close to 1, which means nearly identical, right? Whereas if I take a different word like refrigerator, it's pretty different than either of those things. You don't wear a refrigerator on your head, for example. In fact, you don't wear one at all. And so this underlying math is what's being used in every platform that tries to respond to a question, be it a search query or a prompt. And what that means, because we can do this for ourselves. Screaming Frog gives us a way to get at, how similar a page is to a specific phrase, and gives you similarity scores. And other people have developed their own. The algorithms aren't remarkably difficult to implement, as it turns out. So we can do this for ourselves, and we can optimize our content in ways that we didn't have available to us before. And this works for both Google search and LLMs at the same time. So there's some differences, right? But the differences, I think, are mainly driven not by the similarity comparison process or the relevance assessment process as it is by the objective of the platform on the output side, which is where the bigger differences come into play. But understanding relevance is a huge part of the game, and I can make my content more relevant to LLMs and Google search at the same time. And that's really, really powerful.
Which I feel like to a lot of SEOs listening to this, that should also be like refreshing, a little bit of a
A little wave of
relief.
relief.
Right? Because I mean, some people, it's like, yeah, if you're new to the industry and you're not familiar with vectors, embeddings, and some of those pieces that you were just mentioning, sounds like a lot. There's plenty of material out there, and there's
There
plenty
is.
of ways to kind of get up to speed. That SEOs that have been in the industry for a while is like, great, that's all familiar ground for me.
Right.
And so I think one, it's like you can take a little, again, relief, some
Right.
confidence that the fundamental approaches aren't, night and day different, where
That's
we're
right.
still looking at relevance. And I think even from like an approach of this like hypothesis test and like that, I mean, we've been talking about it for years, is like that test mentality to search. Like to
Mm-hmm.
me, all of that is still very much intact. And it's just, hey, we have some nuance here. We have some new spaces that we're competing in.
Right.
And if anything, I mean, we started the conversation with it's an exciting time in SEO rather than more of a fearful time.
Well, yeah. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, if you've been in the search industry, then you have to be in a role where you are continuously embracing change. So if that has been causing you anxiety, then you've had a long life of anxiety because the change is constant. And I mean, that's just the reality of it. But really, try to feel the joy of it because it's an opportunity to take advantage of.
100%. And you were also kind of like touching in on like Screaming Frog, how like maybe like the barrier to entry of looking at some of these pieces is now a little bit like lower, more approachable.
Right.
How does that, or like elements like that, how does that change how you'd be thinking about like building an SEO program, team, like operationalizing the function? Like, has that shifted and changed significantly from you for if like you were leading SEO in a, you know, Fortune 500 business?
So yeah, for me, every organization who is publishing content or updating content on a regular basis um, should make sure they have tools in hand to understand the relevance of their pages, their web pages, to specific target terms, which hopefully in 98 or more percent of the people listening to this call have title tags that are well tuned to the target search term, right? And assuming that that's the case, you can just look at the title tag. You can run an algorithm to tell you what your similarity is. You can run that same algorithm on the competitor pages that are ranking, hopefully behind you, but maybe in front of you, and see who gets higher similarity scores. And then you can learn from their pages, or you can just apply some basic principles at reviewing your content. Um, so I can't emphasize this enough. This is simply money lying on the table waiting for you to pick it up. That's all it is. If you want more money for the business, then reach over to the table and pick it up. And what that means is you've got to just set it up. And by the way, if you want to not rely on Screaming Frog, you can build a tool for yourself that does these kinds of measurements in a few days of developer time. It's not actually remarkably difficult, as it turns out, especially since the text embedding models like Google's Text Embedding 5 is publicly available. You can use it. So you should be setting up a process for all your most important pages. Good place to start. The ones that aren't ranking as well as you'd like, you probably have something wrong um, that's holding you back. And then run the model, see how you score, see how the competitors score, review the pages based on how these algorithms work. We can talk a little bit more about that as to the things you might do, and optimize them to make the score go up. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to jump from position 9 to position 1 overnight. There are other aspects of the algorithms, and here's where it's bigger difference between LLMs and search. Search is very tied to user engagement as measured by the Chrome browser, and LLMs don't have that available to it, but they can see back and forth interaction with the LLM surface that the user is interacting through, um, and as well as authority signals, a whole nother conversation. But um, this is just something you can decide to do it now, and you can have it in place in 2 weeks and be, or rolling on down the highway and doing things that improve your chances of ranking in all these platforms.
No, I'm gonna go a little off script and it'll be a tangent here, but
There you
I feel
go.
like I can't pass
I
on
can
the
see it.
opportunity.
You got off script.
Well, and this is something that I've just been kind of like, I don't know, curious about. So I'd love to hear your perspective on it. Knowing that piece with Google and Chrome, and so it was like we had the Google API leak, the DOJ trials. Great, we have confirmation, NAVBOO, like we have that information. If that has been such a piece, and I mean, obviously it has been, I'm curious about how does that shift and change when more and more of the experience is being captured within the SERP, whether it's in AI mode or in even like Gemini AIOs? It's like, do you think Google or even other competitors in this sense will have to change how they're using engagement metrics if more and more experience is not happening within the page, but within their own environment?
Such as an agentic browser. Um, so yeah, well, it will change. It'll be, and this is true for ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and Copilot and all of them. Is that they currently have this experience which is kind of parallel to before Google had Chrome available, and they would measure interactions between the user and the search results. So people speculated for years if somebody went to a website and bounced back, was that a negative signal? And that particular interaction probably is asked, probably wasn't directly used as a signal, but things related to it were, because there are certainly queries where user bouncing back fast is actually positive because they got what they wanted so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of nuance in all of that. But Google has been using the interaction with the search results, like going back and doing a clarifying search, which means that the question wasn't answered by whatever sites the person used, and so that is available right now to OpenAI and Anthropic and and all the rest, right? And so um, I'm sure they're using it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So,
I think that query like refinement is a great example too, because and I mean this is just observational, so I don't know how much we can tie to it, but I feel like I have noticed more and more, especially in ChatGPT, the like prompting for that next question that really feels in this like assistant vein of like, great, you asked me this, what's the next action? What's the next thing that you're trying to do? And so I've been kind of curious in that same piece of like, is the number of times that you're taking that follow-up prompt or kind of like initiation, how is that being used to measure even kind of like effectiveness, like quality of response, like those kind of pieces?
yeah, it's a great question because the reality is that the big difference in the LLMs in terms of the output, which actually does relate to your question. Don't worry, I'm not going in an entirely different direction. Is that they try to anticipate the next question and they try to, in the responses they provide, not just simply directly answer the question asked, but the next one and the next one and the next one. And that's fundamental to how the LLM algorithms work. And so this prompt, this follow-on prompt, and I've been seeing it in ChatGPT too. I was trying to actually create an image yesterday for a presentation where I was talking about agentic browsers, and I asked it to create an agentic workflow for a specific question that I had a client that was in a particular market, um, and I asked for a summation of the workflow, and then I asked him, and I got a nice text list, and I said, put that in an image for me, and it did that, and then it came back and asked me, would you like to customize this image to a specific question? And then I did, and because that's actually where I wanted to go. And so they're collecting data every which way they can. They're collecting data because they understand how important it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the Google SERPs, which have been criticized at many levels over the years, it would have been a horror show if they weren't using user information, because the algorithms to actually determine relevance well enough to determine which was the best answer and links and citations to the degree that they used them, um, uh, wasn't enough. They needed more data.
Yeah, and it's almost like a scorecard. Like, especially when you're doing
Right.
this, it's like you need some sort of measurement or KPI of like, are we getting it right or wrong? So it's like I
Yeah.
think to me
Yeah.
it just makes perfect sense that it's like,
Well, and they're
yeah, you
measuring
need a
two things,
scorecard.
right? What's the actual intent? They're trying to
Hmm.
understand the actual intent of a question or the range of intents. Obviously, it's a range of intent for most queries or prompts. And so they're trying to understand that. And then they're trying to understand what satisfies those intents. So it's a furball of a math problem. A little more complicated to implement than when I talked about building a cosine similarity measurement tool for yourself.
Absolutely. Off the record, real quick. Um, I feel like I could keep going on in this for a while, but I do want to give enough time for like the lightning round. Do
Yep.
you want to hit on anything else before we jump in to the lightning round, or
Um, let's see. Well, we could try to do a short version of how um, authority measurement happens, or we could pass on it. They predict the next best word, as I said before. That's not knowledge. You need knowledge to be an authority on something.
and is that something that you feel is just within this immediate kind of mid-horizon term, or is it something that you think we would ever actually fully part from, or is it just going to manifest in a different way?
Ever is a big word. So I'm not aware of anything that breaks the next best word paradigm just yet.
Mhm.
And I'm sure someone somewhere is working on that, but I don't know how to forecast when that might happen.
That's a perfect grounding in it that within the current constructs, there is that continuous need for that human intervention piece.
Yeah,
Um, doesn't mean necessarily that something else could come along to add to that, but
right.
just within the current construct. Next one, so we want to look into the crystal ball and see how things are going to unfold in the future. What do you think a bigger disruption to SEO will be? Google making AI mode the default experience or the progression from ChatGPT Atlas?
Ooh, that's a good question. Uh, this is a lightning round, so I have to try to keep it short. Uh, um, the challenge with Atlas, and this is not something I see many people talking about, and it may be extremely successful. I'm sure it will be at some level, but historically, walled gardens haven't worked. And I'm worried if it comes across like a walled garden that people might not embrace it as much as you otherwise think they would. But it has so much potential to be such an aid. So my jury is out on that one. Um, and so my bet would be on Google, comma bot. Um, let's just say I'm not betting all the money I have on it.
Fair enough. And going back to like kind of the closed garden, and it sounds then like you might have some concerns around like a VHS versus beta kind of scenario.
Well, I mean, America Online failed.
Mm,
It's still there, but I mean, in terms of it was the thing. And sometime when you have time for it, I'll tell you a story of how I was involved in all that. But not its failure, but its growth. Um, but it was a walled garden, and then other people. I think AT&T and Verizon both tried things where they would encapsulate people in their environments and try to own all their online activity going through their surfaces. They failed, and I think it's because people want the flexibility of going many different ways at things. Um, so That doesn't mean that it will happen here. It's just sort of a nagging thing in the back of my head
Mm.
that I worry about.
Which I think it's a fair concern because we have seen that, come up through several different points of kind of like progression in technology. And so I think that is a very valid call out. Next one's going to be trend or trash. ChatGPT 5 will drastically impact how we can utilize and leverage Gen AI.
Well, given the two word choices, I will say uh, trend. I think the value that it brings has great potential. I think there's probably um, many upgrades and updates and expansions coming behind it that will improve its capability as a tool. Um, and the question is ultimately, as people start using the tool and showing preferences of how they want to use it, will that impact the nature of how it delivers its results to be more open and flexible in terms of people determining what they do next? Which you
Meaning,
could read as potentially meaning that they'll need to send traffic to websites
interesting. And
to break the walled garden problem.
right, to open that back up. Next one, what's the word? What's one word that captures where we really are with Gen AI adoption in SEO? And so this would be not just necessarily from a search engine, like where we're competing perspective, but more of like how we're using it as SEO teams.
Infancy.
And we haven't even gotten to the toddler phase.
Maybe we are a toddler, but it's no matter how you score it, it's early days. There's there's so much. First of all, SEMrush's data notwithstanding, I'm not convinced that as many people are using it as much as they might have said they were in response to the SEMrush survey. Not any criticism of SEMrush; they're awesome, but and yeah, it's um, people. There's so much lack of understanding of how to engage with it all.
Mhm. Well, I mean, bring it back around to the beginning of the conversation too. That's like should be further excitement as far as like the just change and evolution that we're approaching in the industry. Not to say that we haven't seen a lot of change, but again, just embracing that kind of aspect of the industry.
Right.
Final question is game plan. So the scenario is you're building an SEO program from scratch. How do you set up Gen AI workflows while future proofing what comes next?
Okay. This was the lightning round, right?
I mean, yeah, lightning round.
Okay. So uh, the first thing I would look at, which might not be directly SEO, but it influences it, is you got to use things like Claude Code or things like that as a fundamental part of how you develop stuff. Um, Remembering that you still need human in the loop because the code is often flawed, but and sometimes in ways that could be hard to find too. So just be aware of that. But it should be able to give you a lot of efficiencies on that side of things. Second, think about the role that you can have in deciding what content to put on your site, the organization of it, how you, um, go about creating content, and there's so many different ways it can help. You can also write schema for you, HT access code. There's so many different parts to it. Um, you just have to design your organization to have the right level of human in the loop. And if you have the wild-eyed visionary, then you probably need about 10 times more human in the loop than what they're thinking. And if you have the skeptic, you probably need half to a quarter of the humans that they're thinking. So find that average somehow. But look, it should be pretty easy to do. Just set up the process so that you definitely have a bit too much human in the loop to start until you find out what feels comfortable and you've got the right balance, and then tune it. The most important thing is get in the game if you're not, right? And if you've had trouble finding those boundaries, then you got to find the right help to help you figure out what those boundaries are, and but get going, because if you think about the objectives right, and you knew this was going to be a longer answer, I warned you. Um, um, Go for 30% increase in efficiency of your operations. You know how many people would have died for 30% 5 years ago? Oh my goodness, it's transformative. So just take the win that's on the table and don't try to make too much of it, and have some fun along the way.
That's perfect advice too. And I think, a lot of people are having conversations of, hey, I'm having, negative impacts to traffic to the site. And I think that last piece of your answer of like, hey, there's other wins available that may not just be an absolute traffic. I mean, obviously we have to look at what's that traffic converting and all those other layers to it.
Yeah.
But I think like that efficiency gain and that potential of like further output of activity from the team is such a key piece. And to like the future proofing aspects of that question, I think you hit head on with the human in the loop piece,
Right.
which goes back to our first question of, if we don't think that there is going to be a world, at least within the current technology, where it can operate without that, then that has to be then in the planning, and it has to be kind of that security safety net to
Right.
ensure that future impact potential.
Well, and that ends up ultimately being your value add, because if I can just tell ChatGPT to do everything for me, so can a competitor. And so, what can you do to make sure that there's real extra level of value add? And the error prone aspects are still very much there, and the industry is littered with stories of people who actually started doing all their publications straight out of ChatGPT, and they're site bombed, and yeah, and I feel bad for them that happened, but they tried to make too much of it, and got to keep your hormones under control. Hormones is probably the wrong word, but your excitement under control.
Mm-hmm.
And take the win, the real win. And if I had more energy for it, something I would do is I would go, find a really good developer and publish a lead gen site in some market, and set something up to leverage all this kind of stuff. And there's probably a way to print money if you do that with the right small focused team doing the right sorts of things. But so I was dreaming about doing that for a while, but then it's like, I'm kind of I have enough going on.
Yeah, you're still in the game, and I'm glad that the excitement in the industry is keeping you in. And I think, again, like coming back around to that last point, I think the capabilities of the technology to keep us grounded in
Yeah,
the extent of using it. And if you try to stretch that beyond where we're at today,
yeah.
of course there are risks to it, but at the same time there's so much opportunity that's on the table for people to just pick up.
So one last comment I want to make on that is, um, keep in mind there are certain applications that are naturally fault tolerant. So an example of that, which those of you who follow the trade press are probably quite aware of, is Meta has been able to do a great job of improving the yield of their advertising through the use of AI. Um, so the reason why that's a great application and can run without substantial human oversight is because if 10% of the ads are a really bad fit, it's not a crisis. The user
Mm.
just ignores the ad. So it's a fault-tolerant application. And those are situations where you can be less guided and get more scale. So that is not the content on your website or the way your website is coded or, any of those things. So,
That's a perfect call out, and I think too, it's like continuously looking for those opportunities, but then
right,
again, just being grounded in the are we being realistic with like the actual implications at hand here?
right.
Well, with that, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Voice of Search podcast. Thanks again, Eric, for joining us. It's always a pleasure. I'm appreciative of the time that you spend with us on here. And if you'd like to contact Eric, you can find a link to his LinkedIn profile in the show notes, or you can be sure to check out his company's website at pilotholding.com. If you haven't subscribed yet and you want a daily stream of SEO content marketing knowledge in your podcast feed, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app or on YouTube, and we'll be back in your feed soon. So with that, that's all for today. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you in the next episode.